Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at a specific day in history and examine the events that happened on that day, examine the historical context and historical ramifications of these events. And as always, we look at some people that were born on that day and some people that died on that day. And without any further ado, this day in history, February the 18th. And on this day, in 1929, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences announced the winners of the first Academy Awards. The first award recipients' names were printed on the back page of the Academy's newsletter. A few days later, Variety published the information on page 7. The first awards went to movies produced in 1927 and 1928. Though the announcements were made in February, the actual awards weren't given out until May, in a ceremony and banquet held in the Blossom Room of the Hotel Roosevelt. Some 227 people attended the dinner, many paying $5 each for a ticket. The first Academy Award winners received the Golden Statues, designed by Cedric Gibbons and sculptor George Stanley, that are now world famous. So the first Oscars were handed out today, the winners were announced today. Births that occurred on this day. In 1516, in Greenwich, Mary the First was born. She was the daughter of Henry VIII, and would overturn the English Reformation and really try to return the Catholic Church to prominence in England. During her reign, she had 280 religious dissenters burned at the stake, which of course had her acquire her famous nickname, Bloody Mary. Deaths that have occurred on this day. In 2001, in Daytona, Florida, Dale Earnhardt died at the age of 49. Earnhardt, of course, was the driver of the famous black number 3 Goodwrench Chevrolet in NASCAR, and was really known as the Intimidator. He was known as the Intimidator for his fierce racing style, his tough, no prisoners attitude. But it's, Earnhardt was always known as a competitor, but it's interesting to note how he died. Earnhardt was a team owner when he died, and he was blocking Sterling Marlin and Ken Schrader from being able to pass him and thus pass the two cars that he owned. One of them was driven by his son, and the other was driven by Michael Waltrip, who would go on to win the race. And Earnhardt Jr. And Michael Waltrip, of course, won. It was just a huge blow to NASCAR. I don't mean to sound tacky or condescending in any way, but there wasn't a Walmart in America or Kmart that had a single shred of Dale Earnhardt memorabilia left on the shelves after it was announced that Dale Earnhardt died. He really was a one-of-a-kind force. He died, of course, of blunt force trauma, and his was one of the first, just moments where the American people, I think, began to realize how big of a cultural phenomenon NASCAR was becoming. CNN and Fox News, and before it made its rise to what it is today, and MSNBC all devoted significant coverage to it. The front page of the New York Times devoted a front page story to it. Just massive, massive coverage. Although that New York Times front page story is a little bit deceptive. If you believe the work of Ann Coulter, she says that that did not occur, and that the only time that the New York Times mentioned it was in a column by Rick Bragg a couple days later, which had the opening line that his death brought a wave of silence to the Walmart. And, Ann Coulter kind of insinuates that the New York Times was looking down on khaki people in the South, and, that only, hillbillies would like NASCAR. It's interesting to note a couple of things. Rick Bragg is from Piedmont, Alabama. The most elitist place in the world that I know of. Ann Coulter is from New Haven, Connecticut. Obviously, Piedmont looks down on those lower class people from New Haven, Connecticut. Just saying. If any place is elitist, it's going to be New Haven compared to Piedmont. I've been to Piedmont. Nice place, nice people, not elitist. I've also heard Mr. Rick Bragg speak before. Very engaging speaker. Yes. As I was saying, Dale Earnhardt was a titan in NASCAR. He was a 7-time champion, which is tied for the most all time. He and Richard Petty are tied with Jimmy Johnson, and of course Jimmy Johnson would go on to tie that record after Earnhardt's death. This terrible, terrible day in NASCAR. The death of the Intimidator, Dale Earnhardt. I hope y'all all enjoyed it. I'll see y'all again tomorrow night, and we'll talk more then, and we'll talk Democratic debate and Democratic town halls later this week.